Tuesday, February 1st meeting of the City of Monona San Damiano Project Steering Committee. And Brian, you've got the roll call there.
Yes.
Do we have any appearances?
No one has filed to appear as
Okay.
of right now.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the January 5th meeting?
I move.
Mary Lee, is there
that
a
we
second?
accept the minutes.
A second. Any corrections or additions? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. I guess we'll move on right away to the agenda here. We've got a couple things under new business. The first is which discussion on use of terms and the request for proposal for the community planning process. Brian included an article in the packet about the question about using the term master plan or conceptual plan. As you'll see when we go over the RFP, we've been using the term conceptual plan. Nancy, I know you were the one who wanted to have this on the agenda. Did you have something you wanted to say about it, or?
Yeah, well, we meaning the Friends of San Damiano initially recommended the change to conceptual plan because of the article that was included.
Mhm.
But kind of hindsight being 2020, one, we felt it was important to bring it to the steering committee. And two, I have several concerns around its use. One is that, post that decision, having dug a little bit further, including speaking to architects and people in the field, it seemed like that group of people, that article was more of an outlier, and that that architectural firms generally understand what master planning means, number one, and that's the generally accepted terminology for what we're looking for. Number two, that the definition of master as an adjective as opposed to a noun is very performative, which is to say a master plumber or, and so it's a descriptor. It's not in any way, shape, or form meant to be offensive. And number three, my concern is that also that if we use a term that's not common, like in the lexicon, that might be confusing for the community as well as for people responding to the RFP, although I think that we can get around the RFP, but certainly with the community, that it might be confusing, and that both the community and donors down the road might feel like, oh, well, it's just a conceptual plan. We can switch it up. We can change it. There's nothing firm about it. And all of which I don't think would serve our purposes well, because if we're going to invest these kinds of resources in coming up with a plan, I would hate people to get the idea. I mean, certainly that plan may change based on what we're able to raise, but I would be concerned that the community would feel like, we're just kind of still throwing out ideas here, and that we might switch it all up, after we put these kinds of time and energy into it. So I just thought ultimately this group should be the decider of that and should discuss it further.
Anybody else have any comments?
Can I speak as to when I did these kind of plans, because my degree is in landscape architecture, there's a very large difference between a conceptual plan and a master plan. So, I don't know if there's going to be another word that would be better than conceptual, but just conceptual is not the word we want there, because there's a huge difference between the two plans. So, is there a better name? Maybe, I know as a real estate, we've gone from master bedrooms to primary bedrooms. I mean, but the meaning is the same, but there is a difference between a conceptual and a master plan.
Anyone else?
I agree with Mary Lee. Master planning is the correct terminology for this type of project. Just like you would do a master city plan or a master historic preservation plan. That's just the terminology that's used in this. It's not the same as a master gardener or master plumber.
I did notice that that's master plan is what the city of Madison is using for the John Nolan planning process. Anyone else? Thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with Mary Lee and the comments that are made. And I also would say, I think I understand the sentiment and the intent, but behind the discussion, but I think there's other ways for us to prioritizing inclusivity, including how we engage groups and the strategy behind the RFP and all the inside of it. So those are things we should be thinking about and prioritizing and ensuring that we're reaching out to the community partners we want to be reaching out to.
Anyone else? Well, we can certainly change it. I mean, I think we were planning on calling it master plan, and then the Friends brought up this issue, and so we changed it. But I completely agree that there's, to me, conceptual doesn't mean set in stone either. So I don't know, do you want to vote on it, or is the consensus that we should change it back to master plan? I think we can do whatever anybody wants, so.
I think if it's the general consensus of the body, we don't need to take a formal vote.
Okay.
Unless there's any,
Well, then,
unless
I
there's
guess
any
we'll
objection, we just revert back to that terminology.
okay. So assuming no one, since no one else has spoken up, I'm assuming no one has an objection to going back to master plan. So, all right. Well, then we will move on to a review and discussion of the draft RFP, which you all have in your packet, and Brian put together. And certainly, we're happy to hear people's comments. Anything you think should be added or corrected or changed or whatever. Brian?
Just a couple of introductory comments. So as it says, this is very much a draft, so I'm open to any questions, comments, concerns, revisions, whatever the case may be from this body. This draft, I based this on a couple of different sources. One, I looked at what the city of Madison most recently did with their Vilas master plan, emailed back and forth with a couple of their staff members to get some perspective and context as to how they ran that process and what they were looking for. It's based upon some experience that I had at a previous community that I worked in, where we did a very similar community visioning process and a review of some of the current best practice literature and planning and public policy and public participation. So the goal with this RFP, and I guess a couple of other comments in terms of terminology, this type of thing that we're asking for, there are firms that have done this, there are communities that have done this for sure, but there isn't a agreed upon term as to what you call what we're asking for in terms of professional services. So when you see in this draft, I call it, we're asking for process management consulting services. That's a term of art, and I understand there might be some confusion or some clarity that needs to happen when we talk to consultants who are responding to this RFP about this, but it's really because this is more than just community engagement, like the public participation piece. That is absolutely a component of what we're asking for, but it is one piece among a couple of different things that we're asking this firm or firms to complete for us. So that's why, I use the term process manager. If there's a better term that this group wants me to use, I can use it, but I will say I've looked far and wide, and there's not a great way of, an agreed upon term that we'd call this, because somebody who responds to this could have a background in landscape architecture and planning and public participation, all of the above, grant writing. I mean, there could be a whole different number of skill sets that a firm or firms would bring together as part of a proposal. So this draft was trying to be as inclusive as possible, you know, capturing the things that we think we will need to get to the final stage, which is, you know, what we talked about in November, kind of a, you know, visual illustration of what that property could be based upon the community feedback and some different scenarios in terms of how things could be laid out on the site, documentation of all the public engagement that we've received leading up to that, some kind of testing on possible funding opportunities that may exist, some initial site evaluation and feasibility testing on some things. So a whole host of different skill sets that we're asking the respondent to provide to us. I try to capture that as best as possible in this RFP, but happy to answer any questions or take any feedback that you might have on this.
Doug?
Yeah, so based on the discussion we just had, will the references in the RFP to a conceptual plan be changed to master plan?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And then just a question on, in the project description, it talks about we'll be looking for the selected firm would assist in identifying grant writing opportunities as well as the rest of the planning process. Is that something fairly common, or are we going to be, if we're asking one firm to do both those, the planning and the grant writing, are we going to limit the number of people, or would they do that through a subcontractor?
Yeah, it really depends on the specialties of the firm. In previous projects, I've seen it done a couple of different ways. Sometimes some of the larger firms have on their staff somebody that specializes in grant writing that's part of these proposals. So they have that in-house, and so they have that staff person listed on their RFP response and saying that's part of the project team. And so they'd help you that way. Other firms that don't have that specialty in-house sometimes will subcontract with another firm to help do that. One example is the city of Madison in their Vilas Park process that they did, about a year or two ago. The firm that they ended up selecting, was a firm that's pretty big in town, but that firm had a number of subcontractors that were aligned with the main firm to handle some of the pieces that firm didn't have in house. So I would totally expect we'd see, a number of different iterations of how the team, as it were, would be put together, whether it's all from one firm or from a firm that subcontracts with a couple of other firms to get the skills that they need to, respond.
Nancy?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I want to go back to Marilee and Rebecca on this terminology as well. To me, it seems to me that we had a previous conversation around whether or not we wanted to separate out the process from the design. And what we discussed was the notion that we would want to select someone that was capable of doing both, whether it was subcontracting to do the process, which, although, I don't know, it seems to me that we talk a lot about process in the document in terms of the importance of the community engagement. And so to just articulate it as a process manager rather than, I think we're looking more for a design firm, frankly, than we are a process firm. So I guess I'm wondering if it should say design and process management, or just a firm that, I'm wondering, again, I'm going to lean on Marilee and Rebecca, since they see a lot of these or their firms do that. It just seems to be titling it just process. We could conceivably end up with, someone who may be strong in process but not in design, and we clearly need the design. That it seems to me that's a priority as much as the process. And so maybe it should be both. I just throw that out to the group. That would be my thought.
Andrew?
Well, and kind of building off of that, I'm wondering if we even need to come up with a terminology or a title and just say, you know, we're looking for planning and design services. And then those firms probably have employees that already have titles for various things.
I think that's too broad of a category, to be honest. I think we want to be as specific as possible in terms of what you want, so you get the response that's more tailor fit to what we need.
But
What's
if
the,
we're spelling out what we want in the rest of the RFP, right, as opposed to in a singular title, doesn't that work?
My fear is that if you say you want planning and design services, that would lead firms to think that you've got something already that you want to have shovel ready, turnkey, ready to go on the site. That getting more to what we talked about before with like a site development plan. That's my fear, is if we strayed down that path, we're going to get firms that think we've got, you know, a project that we want to have built, whereas we don't have that now. We want to help. We want the firms to help us go through a process to get to that point. And so I think we just need to be as specific as possible throughout the document in terms of what we want the end result to be.
Wes?
it seems like we want a firm that can lead, support the steering team and engaging the community in developing concepts that are vetted, and then ultimately master planning for San Damiano. And so it's sort of, we've got multiple things that we're wanting. It's just what, but I think we have to start with what's the end product that we want, and really focus in on describing that. And that relates to another question I had about the extent to which we need some cost estimates. And that relates to fundraising after the plan is completed. And I think from the Friends perspective, having, you know, getting to the point where there's a certain percentage of enough design is completed so that we can generate some accurate cost estimates so we can go fundraise is an important deliverable as well to articulate.
Rebecca?
I'll just give my thoughts on it since Nancy was pointing to me. I am familiar with the term project manager. I've not heard of process manager, but a project manager would manage all of these things that we're talking about, from cost estimating to site design to, you know, all the things that we have listed under here, the community engagement. And that project manager can contract out with somebody to do the site design, or someone to, you know, do the grant writing. But it would all fall under the project manager rather than having multiple people.
Anyone else? See a little hand thing on my screen, but I think it's from my computer, not anyone else's. What do you think? Should we switch it to project manager? I can see some, that makes some sense to me.
I think it gets back to what type of consultant or firm do we want to engage for the work? Do we want a firm that design firm, or, you know, a landscape architecture firm, or a master planning firm that also understands that it's going to be facilitating extensive community and engagement as part of their work? Or do we want more of an individual that specializes in facilitating community engagement that's may not have the design specialty that we're looking for? So, you know, it seems like kind of a choice we want to make in terms of what to emphasize.
Brian?
Let me talk maybe a little bit about how this RFP would be released or marketed for firms. So I have a running list of about 13 different firms in the Madison, Milwaukee, and kind of greater regional area that you know, either landscape architecture firms, or have, you know, some sort of planning emphasis, firms that have done this type of work in the kind of metro area over the last 10 or so years. In addition to those firms that we would directly send this proposal to, we would also post it on a number of different listservs that are frequented by those in the profession. So there's the Wisconsin chapter of the American Planning Association, the national chapter of that, the Wisconsin chapter of the American Landscape Architecture chapter. There's the Wisconsin chapter of the American Institute of Architects we posted as well. The School of Department of Landscape and Urban Planning at UW-Madison, a similar school at UW Milwaukee that also has connections in the Milwaukee metro area, and then our standard city website and city bid page. So we do some direct marketing to firms that have done this work, and then also blast it far and wide through kind of the planning channels, the landscape architecture channels, and the architecture channels to try to reach those firms that have that kind of multidisciplinary background to do both the public participation side of this work and then also kind of the schematic design that we're also talking about.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Brian, do you send it out to UW Milwaukee School of Architecture and Design?
Yep, that's on my list. Yep.
Yeah, because they're urban planning as well. So.
Nancy?
So Brian, with that list, would we be hitting, I mean, I know, way back at one point, we talked about even doing kind of a national posting, given the importance of the project. And I understand that may be more than we can afford, but I'm wondering if there's a way to expand it beyond Wisconsin, which is to say that, I'm sure that there may be firms, not to mention parks that might be interested to look at, and Minneapolis, or other places outside of Wisconsin, or did I miss something on the list?
Yeah, sorry. As part of that list, in addition to the Wisconsin chapters, we would also post at the national organization for those 3 different disciplines. So yes, it would be posted on, like, for example, the national chapter of the American Planning Association. So you capture a national audience by doing that.
Doug?
Yeah, Brian, I assume it was you that introduced the term process manager. And you said it was a term of art. And maybe you can just tell us more kind of what you were thinking when you use that instead of project manager.
Yeah, I use the word process because at least in our initial conversations, the focus was on wanting to make sure that we had an intentional and robust community engagement component that led into the vision, whatever that vision is, and however we represent that in a visual manner. So I wanted to make sure that that was front and center of this response. I think the ways in which we articulate the different deliverables and what we're asking of this firm is where we can spell out in more specificity what we're asking this firm or firms to do. I'm not opposed to using the word project. I am a little concerned because it has more of a connotation with getting a project actually built, and we're not quite there yet. We're at the planning stages, so that's why I shied away from the term project manager and focus more on process manager, because that seemed to be more where we were in this process. But I'm open to the committee's suggestions and edits on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's kind of my understanding of project manager as well. I guess I'm wondering if we could just take that whole, there's the phrase in the second line of the RFP, seeking a qualified firm or individuals to serve as a process manager to facilitate community planning, visioning, et cetera. I'm wondering if we could just take out the reference to serve as process manager, take that out. I mean, I think the rest of it then describes what we're, the services we're looking for. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Well, I would just go back to what Rebecca said, which is if we're defining project manager one way, but that's not the way that architectural industry would define it, which is to say, when people receive RFPs and we're asking for a project manager, if that's understood within the firm, aside from the rest of the RFP that describes it, that there are various services within that, including community engagement. I'm assuming that most projects do have, if we're looking for a master plan, that would, you know, and we describe at length the fact that we want the community engagement, then I don't know, it just seems like, again, if that's the typical terminology that's used, why would we want to veer from it?
Lorraine, did you have something to say?
I did, but I'm totally different area. My focus was because of the cultural aspect of this. I think diversity should also be a part of when choosing a firm as well. So either, you know, people of color that are part of the firm or have an experience of working with diversity, I think is really important as well. So I'm not sure we included that.
So to include in the RFP.
Right.
Okay. Good suggestion. Would you, I mean, I kind of like Doug's idea of just dropping the term from the initial description. We could still, Brian, do you use process manager? I can't remember now throughout the, is that used several times throughout the document?
I like that sentence that Doug was referencing. And it's exactly what we want. It's community-driven planning, visioning, and master planning. Those are the, so a title that encapsulates that would be good.
We could even call the person a facilitator, couldn't we? If
That might get more complicated, because then you're looking at people that are more of like the gentleman who helped us facilitate the meeting we had in November for this body, which that's one set of skills. That's not necessarily the same set of skills that you'd want to run a more in-depth community engagement process. So I think the best bet, if we're worried about clarity's sake, would be just to strike the title.
Okay. Any other comments about the RFP?
We
Wes?
talked about the deliverables a little bit. So this is page 6, I think. I think we should add a deliverable that encapsulates the engagement process. It's not an end deliverable, but it's a major step, I think, that we're looking for. So probably I guess I'd propose a new number 1 that discusses the community engagement aspect. I think the current number 1 makes sense, and I think number 3 makes sense. Number 2, I'd be interested to understand more, Brian, what you're thinking in terms of the role of a firm in getting into the funding side of things as it relates to the role of the friends with private fundraising and just how these things fit together.
Yeah, and this is not necessarily private fundraising that we'd be asking this firm or firms to take a look at. It's the grant side of things. So as I mentioned before,
Okay.
a lot of these firms have somebody on staff that's focused in on looking at various federal, state, and county grant programs and can offer those. They wouldn't write you a grant unless it's part of their proposal and they charge you a fee for that, but they could identify and say, based upon our prior work on waterfront projects across the country, we think these 3 federal programs line up nicely with what is being proposed here. And we have experience applying for this state program. We think these might be viable grant opportunities for you to do further research on. That's what I mean by that.
So this would be really helping the city identify public funding sources to offset purchase. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Well, offset purchase and any future operations or whatever may happen on site. So can I go back to your question about adding a new number 4? I just want to make sure I'm clear as to how that I think what you said, encapsulation of community engagement is different than documentation of public comment and input received during the planning process.
Yeah, I think that's a little, I mean, the documentation is good, but I think it doesn't speak to the, I guess, the active and expansive community engagement that we're hoping to achieve. So I think one way to do that could be to say, design and implementation of community input sessions, and describe that part of the work a little bit more actively. And obviously we would want to document that and have all the comments. But it seems like that would be an important deliverable. Up front, we'd want to design that process with the firm, agree that, the number of sessions, the types of sessions, the how that would work. Is it just Monona? Is it broader? Really, it seems like that would be a really important, interaction to have with the firm as we design that process.
Okay, so I think I'm understanding. So maybe that becomes a new number one.
Yeah.
Everything else
what I
gets
meant.
moved down. So then it's design a framework for the community engagement process so that, this committee and others have understanding of what are the various steps that we will be going through whatever, whether it's a 12-month process or longer, that we know schematically, here's the milestones that we're going to be checking off on this process. Okay.
Exactly.
Nancy?
Yeah, I would just say in relation to things, in relation to that since I see RFPs every week, typically, the RFPs that I see, again, speak to the issue of deliverables or outcomes, the exact outcomes that the potential client wants. And then as the consultant, I'm required to, like, in the initial proposal, I'm expected to articulate what I think would be the best process. So I would like to, and I think it would be advantageous for this group to actually have in responses what they would recommend as a framework that we're speaking about in number one, that we would then, work to refine with as we go through the interview process or the selection process and the criteria that we're looking for, et cetera. So that's number one. And number two, I want to go back to Lorraine's comment because I think it's really important that and actually it relates to something that Wes said as well. In terms of the overall, first of all, Brian, I want to back up and say thank you for doing this. I know this is a lot of work and I appreciate what you've put forward. Second, when we talk about community, I think it's really important that we define that community, which is to say it's not just Monona. We've said from the very beginning, we've articulated from the very beginning, we learned from the very beginning through the feasibility study that people don't view this as just a Monona thing. And in fact, now in terms of funding, it's not. It's one of the reasons why the county stepped in. It's one of the reasons why Madison Community Foundation stepped in. And so whether we refer to that community, whether we define that community as the metro area, especially the east side, or Monona and the surrounding area, or how we define that, I think it's really important to get across that we're not just talking about the city of Monona when we're talking about engagement. And B, that we are talking about a process that is very inclusive.
Brian, does you have any thoughts about that or?
I mean, pretty much everything that you said, Nancy, is in the document in some way, shape, or form. If there's something you want me to pull out and put in a different spot, I'm happy to do that. But we do talk about that this project is regional in nature. We talk about additional partners beyond just the city of Monona in section 3B. We talk about different project partners that we would work with. We do under 5C Number 4, talk about outreach strategies for engagement that encourages and amplifies traditionally underrepresented voices. But I am hearing Lorraine's comment, so I can add language or add a number 8 to be more clear about, the firm, whoever's responding, their experiences, either, having underrepresented populations as part of their firm or working with underrepresented and diverse communities in their work, so that they show us that in their proposal. I think that's absolutely fine to add that. The regional PCI, we can add some language towards the beginning to clarify that this is regional, just so that's clear on the front end.
Okay, point taken, it just read a little bit more like a Monona, it seemed to me like a Monona project when I was reading through it. So if other people are comfortable with it, that's fine. I think that's important. And if we can reinforce that inclusivity, I think that would be really important wherever that's appropriate in the document.
Anyone else? Comments or suggestions for Brian?
Sorry.
Nancy?
Yeah, I just have on page 5, it says under recreation, it says public recreation consistent with the uses of other public parks in Monona. And we specifically struck that out of the MOU because in other words, it just ended with parks. It didn't say parks in Monona, because we obviously want to be looking at other parks beyond Monona for our ideas, and don't want our vision to be limited by just what we have in front of us already.
I think that's fine. I think, and again, they've not finalized what this language is yet, so this is not set in stone. But the sense I get from Dane County is one of the things in their kind of their conditions with their $2 million appropriations will be that that the uses are consistent with other park uses in Monona. Now, whether that language ends up surviving to the end of this process, that remains to be seen. But that's why I have it in there now, just because that's the sentiment I got from speaking with Dane County staff. But I think for the purposes of this document, I think it's fine to take it out.
Okay.
Well, can we say Monona and surrounding areas and surrounding parks? Because there are other parks that are so close to this park that are not Monona parks. They're actually Madison parks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I
Parks
was
in
just gonna
Monona
leave
and
it
the
at
surrounding
park,
area.
period. Right, that's why I was just thinking if we ended it at parks, period, consistent with other parks. It's not like we're talking about transforming it to something other than that would be, but yeah.
Andy, did you have something?
Yeah, so I just have, for what it's worth, I chatted with Rob Stein, who's on the Plan Commission, is a landscape architect too. So, and I know there's other people in the field on this call that have maybe similar or different ideas. So I just wanted to pass along some of his comments because he had a chance to look over it. As far as the deliverables, he thought we should be a little bit more detailed as far as each bullet point should be a separate deliverable. He gave the example that in the first deliverable, it kind of summarizes 3 different deliverables all in one. And so he recommended that we really separate those out to be very clear for the firm to look at it of what we're looking for from them. He, again, whether this is related to the RFP or not, he articulated that the 18-month timeline is quite long for what we're looking for as far as deliverables. I know we should maintain that flexibility, and I explained that to him. But he said that that's what's going to really increase the costs from the $150,000. is extending it past that year, or that 12 months, and he thought that that was a little bit more relatable. His other thing that I'll just pass on now, and then I can send Brian some of his more specific comments. He thought that we should provide a deadline for questions for the firm so that everybody knew when to send in questions. He saw that there is the ability to send in questions and that we would post it for all to see. But he said a deadline would be important for the firms to understand as far as giving out questions. One other one that he and I talked about a little bit was just, do we need to define financially feasible and what that means? And because it obviously means different things to the city, different things to the firm, wanted to throw that out there as well. This is more my comment in talking with Madison Community Foundation, and I'll send Brian some of the contacts that they provided to me as well. But related to Laureen and other people's comments, they really encouraged us to think about how a firm might involve diverse populations in the creation of the community engagement process, not having a firm necessarily come to us and say, this is how the process is going to work, but looking at the populations that we want to have involved, getting them together to create whatever the engagement process is and input processes. And again, I'll send Brian some examples of those. But
I think that's a good comment, Andy, and probably why the 18 months is probably pretty on target in my opinion, because there's a lot of time that could go into the design of this to get it right. Sure. In the front end.
Kelly, did you have something? Okay, Nancy?
Yeah, I would be curious to know, Kyla, what you think of this, or and that is where we list the community partners or potential and list the Ho-Chunk, and then we put in parens, especially the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. I mean, certainly we will be involving them, but I think maybe including the Tribal Historic Preservation Office rather than especially, because engaging the Ho-Chunk that live in Madison or in this area is, as part of what we, is different than engaging the governmental office that's in Black River Falls. And I think both are important. Kyla, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the only thing that, so I think that makes sense to me, because that would be a partner with us. Well,
Right.
Wherein if there are Ho-Chunk community members who are interested, I would imagine that those would be, community as a group, not to, because any individual cannot speak on behalf of the nation, and whatever bill provides for us eventually will be what the nation is going to be backing up. So I think that's perfectly appropriate. The only thing I had a thought on with getting together a group of community members to guide the process itself, I'm only a little weary on that, because that then puts the onus completely on individuals who perhaps don't have the time or resources. So if that is the way that we were to be going, we really have to make sure that is providing some sort of like a stipend or something like that for these individuals to be involved in that, because that's a big ask. I've been involved with other health departments of Dane County, and that's it's hard to get people involved unless they're being compensated in some way. They've just got a lot going on in their lives. So I just kind of keep that in mind for that process.
Andrew?
A question I had, environment on page, what is this, page 3, environmental analysis is listed. Can you, what's included in that, or what is that?
Just an initial assessment if there's any unknown like water quality or ground contamination issues that we're not aware of. They can do some archival research and at least do a phase 1 to let us know if there's anything that we don't already know about.
Gotcha.
Anyone else? Kelly, did I see your hand go up? Okay.
Back to the page 4B with the Ho-Chunk Nation, maybe they could just have 2 bullets. So it was clear that it was 2 different entities. And then, I mean, I understand the wording might have to change a little bit on Ho-Chunk Nation, maybe Ho-Chunk Nation community, but maybe just to make it clear that there's, give them 2 bullets.
Does that
Just an idea.
make sense, Kyla, or?
Well, I just hesitate to have, unless we're gonna say that, we're involving the, X community and X community, X community. I'm not sure for that bullet point, if that entirely makes sense. Because, I mean, it makes perfect sense to have the Ho-Chunk Nation as a partner, and that would essentially be Historic Preservation Officer Bill Quackenbush. I don't think we're gonna get any feedback from anyone else in the nation besides that office. If we're going to put every single community in there, then it would make sense. But I'm not sure if it makes sense to parcel them out like that.
Okay. Doug, did you have something?
Yes. Well, first, some really good discussion points, suggestions so far. Yeah, just a very minor thing on the additional project partners. I believe the correct name is Historic Blooming Grove Historical Society, unless they've changed it, which they have talked about removing the redundancy, but they haven't, so.
Nancy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I want to go back to Wes's comment around the deliverables. Just generally, I want to make sure we're clear on at the end of this process what we need to have. Brian, I know that when we were together in November, you shared a rice paper, almost kind of conceptual plan. There I go. I'm using conceptual plan rather than master plan. And I'm not saying that we necessarily need more than that at the end of this, but I do think from a friend's standpoint and from a overall standpoint, we probably, in the same way that when somebody comes in front of the plan commission or in front of public works with a project, we usually need to get like 30% or so down the line before somebody can start putting cost estimates on it, and not only cost estimates, but potentially even some of those costs broken out by project, which is to say, maybe there's a cost for what that sketch represents for the waterfront, and there's a cost for what it, the facility, and if there's a facility, and because I'm feeling like the friends would probably, because if we don't get that by the end of this process, if we don't have that at the end of this process, then we're going to end up spending more time and more money needing that before we can fundraise. So I think we're going to need to be far enough along in whatever the plan looks like for somebody to be able to give us a solid estimate of what it would be overall by in 2025, let's say, and then potentially even broken out, you know, into some pieces, in order for us to then turn around and be able to build a capital campaign off of that. And I would think that they would, not only that, but I would think that that's what the city would need, or anybody would need to do any kind of grants, right? Like we just talked about the grant writing. I mean, we'd have to be far enough along in the design to be able to start to spin out, whether, you know, grants and other fundraising. And so I just want to make sure that the deliverables take us there.
Yeah, I think if we break out the deliverables as Andrew suggested into separate bullet points, we do talk about both on page 6 and on page 3, we talk about the desire or the requirement that they provide visualization of potential project outcomes, meaning visual scenarios, and then we'll add some language to clarify that also as part of that, we want cost estimates that are associated with the master plan component. So for example, well, I don't have a good representation, but if part of their visual map showing the site and the different things that could happen there, if there is a waterfront component where they're proposing that we rehab the shoreline and change the riprap or something, we would ask to have cost estimates for that piece, you know, be broken out so we know it's going to cost X amount of dollars. Then we can go to different grant programs or private funders and say, we need assistance funding this piece of the project. So yeah, I can further clarify that, but yeah, that is the intent, that we would have that come back as part of the proposal.
Anyone else? I'm just thinking, do we have anything in there about prioritizing the pieces of the project? Kind of seems like maybe there should be something about that. But I don't know how much detail we want to get into.
Yeah, I mean, that's really more of a policy decision that, you know, steering committee, city council, and other players will have to be involved in. You know, I think this is setting the table for what's possible on the site based upon community feedback. But in
Okay,
terms of what piece gets funded, that's really a policy decision.
anyone else?
I guess related to the financial feasibility, I think it's my assumption that that's going to be a big discussion for this committee go through the process, and that's a combination of what we think is possible from a, you know, public grants and private fundraising, and based on how this plan comes into shape. Because it seems like in the document we're asking the firm to give some, you know, C7, it says describe how the process will assist in arriving at a financially feasible plan. I think I understand that better now, Brian, if they have access to, they're knowledgeable around grants that are, you know, possible, and we're aligning some of the, you know, ideas with that makes sense. But I think in the middle of our process, we're going to have to do a private fundraising check, and that could be one of the ways that we prioritize, or could be one of the ways that we narrow down our thinking, because there might be things that come out of our planning and community input that just, you know, are unattainable. So I think that my assumption, that's a discussion that's happening at the steering committee as we go through, and part of the process design, I think.
I agree with that. And if we move into at some point as a group that, you know, we're doing a phase process, you know, if it's, you know, we pick out this phase, but that will be policy later on. But keeping an eye on the project as it's moving closer, I mean, those are decisions we may have to make along the way.
Nancy?
Well, yeah, so I was just gonna, Brian, I'm wondering, because we do have expertise, a lot of expertise here. I'm wondering if if it makes, you know, I mean, I appreciate the list that you put together of the places that would be sent to, but I'm wondering if it might be, if people had recommendations as to firms that they think would be good for this work. Maybe it's firms that they unearthed when they were, designing a new school, or, you know, because of other involvement in town. Would you like to get those names from people?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take names of any firms. Like I said, I want to post this far and wide, so as many firms that might be interested, I want to put it in front of them so they can decide for themselves whether or not they want to, you know, pursue this opportunity.
But certainly if anybody has the name of a firm they'd like to make sure we contact, send it to Brian, and it's probably already on the list, but it doesn't hurt to just double check. Anyone else with anything about the RFP? Or Brian, do you think you've got enough to go on for?
I do. I will. I'll have to spend some time going through stuff to see how long it's going to take to get this in a revised format. The goal was to possibly post on March 1, but that's not a hard deadline. We want to make sure we get this right, so we'll post it whenever it's ready. So I'll see how, you know, what it's going to take to get this in final format.
Do you envision bringing this back to another meeting, or just sending it to committee members for any comments they might have, additional comments, or how would you like to handle that?
I'm happy to do whatever the committee would like. If you'd like to see it one more time, I can plan to have this, you know, ready before our next meeting, or if you just want me to send you a redlined version with all of your, you know, the stuff that we talked about today added in for further comment, I'm happy to do that. So you just let me know what you'd like.
Does anyone have a preference? Why don't you send it, just send it to all of us for comments, and if it turns out to be something that is more involved than, you know, you originally thought it might be, then we can bring it up at the next meeting. Does that sound, that way, if there isn't a lot, we can still get it out in a fairly timely fashion?
Okay.
Okay. Is that okay with everybody? All right. Do a little bit discussion of the building conditions assessment, which Grafe, we got from Grafe, and Brian has sent that to everyone. Guess it is what it is, as far as I'm concerned. It's just it's another piece of the puzzle at this point. More information for the process, and we did confirm with them that the building is safe for groups of people to go through. So once we get through the winter and the messiest part of things here, I'd like to plan some open houses, you know, maybe on some Sunday afternoons or something in the spring, when we won't have people tracking mud through the place and everything. So anybody have any comments or questions about the report? Doug?
Yeah, just if I read it correctly, their estimated cost to do the full rehab project was like $450 to $800 a square foot. So, and that's, not counting the basement, it's almost 7,000 square feet. So that was when I actually did the calculation, that was a number that kind of opened my eyes really wide.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't,
And the basement needs some significant work with the foundation, probably right away. Rebecca, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to having an open house, Mary. I understand that it's structurally sound for people to walk through, but they need to be aware that it's not accessible. And maybe the city wants to be aware of that, because there are a lot of, aging community members that may not be able to walk those stairs. So I don't know if an open house right now would be the best idea. Just because
I think we've had an awful lot of people who have asked about seeing what it looks like inside. But you're right, it certainly is not accessible. Especially that third floor is definitely would be a challenge for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, another alternative, that we could consider would be to do a video tour similar to what we did with police and fire stations
True.
conditions. So maybe that's something we do in the spring once the light is better. That way then it's viewable for everybody, via the city website.
Mhm.
I think that's a great idea, even just to have already.
Yeah,
Even
we
a
should probably
matter-
do that anyway.
Even in
Um,
Matterport, get a professional photographer in, get a real estate photographer in that can do the video and do a Matterport. And that's interactive for people, it's just on there and people can stand in a room and look around the room and move through the building, and it's really inexpensive. I mean, I think to probably do a video photos, professional photos, and Matterport would probably be about $400. So it might be worth, and then it's up on everybody's website, it's usable for everybody, but that's kind of a cool visual way of doing things also.
That's true.
Yeah,
Marie,
just
and
wanted to,
then Rebecca.
yeah, I'll just speak to that really quick. I know Kelly Unke, she works for Stark. She does that for her houses that she's got online. So maybe she has some input on how to get that done, or maybe she would do it.
Okay. Lorene?
I was just gonna add, I like the idea of video as well, especially with COVID right now as well. So.
True. Yep. Yeah, I think regardless of whether we have any in-person tours, we should have a video. So that'd be good to check into. Nancy?
Yeah, I would just say, though I do think that there's a strategic question, which we don't have to answer now, but I think it's worth thinking about. Which is, given that we don't know the disposition of the house right now, and we won't for the better part of 2 years, does that mean that the house just sits there totally unattended and shut down and boarded up for 2 years? And is there some sort of, I know there's a way to professionally mothball something. And I know that, Public Works and Park and Rec has already drained the pipes and all kinds of stuff to take care of it. But I think there's again, I just think it's something that maybe we need to think about as a group, maybe for the next meeting is, and then discussions with Park and Rec is, does that mean that the house stays boarded up for 2 solid years? Except for maybe an occasional handful of people,
I guess I'm not sure well, Rebecca, what do you have?
I understand what she's saying. I think that the building should definitely be weatherized so that we don't have further deterioration of anything, and tempered so that, it doesn't, same things, further deterioration or pests or anything. But the other thing I was thinking of too, as I drove down the street at night and you can't see a thing, is I think that building should definitely be lit up, and maybe even the park in general should be lit up, because anybody could walk that property right now in the dark and do whatever they want.
I think there are some motion, at least I'd asked Jake to put motion lights on the building. I need to confirm with him that he's actually done that last summer. I assume he did.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure in terms of what that would require. I don't disagree with you, but what that would require in terms of putting electrical in there on the outside.
Sure.
One thing, just in reading the report, it was pretty clear that they think some of the problems with the foundation are due to it having been not necessarily mothballed, because it wasn't really closed up completely until this year. But I did have Brian ask Grafe afterwards about, should we definitely be having, because right now there's no heat in there. Should we be making sure we have heat at least going forward? And they said definitely yes. So Brian and I already talked about that. Right now we've got because it's all radiator heat, everything's been drained and everything. But certainly in the spring, summer, we'll be taking care of that, I think, so that next year we'll keep it at a low level. But I'm not sure what it's been kept at while it's been vacant. Do you know, Brian?
I don't.
Jake, no.
Mary, I just also want to speak as being on the Landmarks Commission, we don't want to neglect this building as it is a
True.
landmark. We don't want to fall into that demolition by neglect at all.
Right.
So we need to be conscious of that.
Yeah, so we will make sure in the summer that it's, at least in terms of the heating and, yeah, we'll have to talk about whatever and what other things. But again, there's the money question, so. Anyone else? Nothing else. Brian, what do you think about in terms of, what are you thinking about in terms of do we have any discussion of future, anybody have any future agenda items they'd like to see? Brian, did you have any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, it's going to depend on, getting through the edits on the RFP, and if we're at a place where that can just get released on, around March 1, then we'll do that. If there's no further comments, or if there's substantial comments, then obviously we'll bring that back on the agenda for early March. Have the committee take one last pass at it before we post it. If this kind of early part of the month timeframe works for people, then maybe I'd suggest we try to meet that first week of March. March starts on a Tuesday. So if Tuesday works for people, the same 5 o'clock timeframe, we just book that and we'll see what the agenda fleshes out as we progress here through February.
Well,
Okay, I don't know if I'm going to be available, but Andy can certainly run the meeting. Nancy, did
well,
you?
yeah, I was just gonna say, just to follow up on the conversation we just had, maybe it makes sense in terms of the next agenda for this group to think about, and certainly friends can think about it, the city can think about it from again, not having the lighting issue that Rebecca raised, the caring for the house, and talk about, what limited use we might need or want for not just the house, but also the property, in the next 2 or 3 years, because again, I'm assuming that it's one of the things that the Madison Community Foundation said to us is, don't wait for a perfect master plan before you do anything. It's going to take a while for us to not only come up with a master plan, but also come up with, actually implementing that master plan. And I think we need to think about, again, how we can safely use the property, and what kind of dollars that might take in the meantime.
I do know that Jake and the senior center are both thinking of things they can do there, in terms of various events or small group things or whatever. I know the senior center's already had a couple of different events there. So yeah, Wes?
Brian, I think a good agenda item would be the 2022 calendar, because I think we're fleshing out fundraising plans and some event plans. And so I think there's some things in the works on the fundraising side that we should at least be all aware of, and then
Okay,
needs to coincide with Jake's plans and everything. So
right. And are you thinking of another cleanup day too?
I have no idea. I'm not.
I thought Andy had mentioned that at one point, but. Okay, anything else in terms of future agenda items? Okay, well then, Brian will be in touch about the next meeting date, and is there a motion to adjourn?
I will motion to adjourn.
And I will second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand. Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Night.
Thanks again,
Right.
Brian. Thanks.